The Bear Essentials podcast gives older bears a place to gather for real talk regarding topics and issues that they can relate to. Here at The Bear Essentials, we aren't just having conversations. We are looking to provide actionable intelligence through real-life experience and expertise of our guests. Our mission is to build a strong community that elevates and motivates people to go beyond their limiting beliefs by helping them realize that getting older is not an excuse to hibernate on their goals, but a reason to work harder.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Charles Wallace. I want you to stop for a second. Imagine just closing your eyes and trying to walk from your living room to your dining room. Imagine just in a place that's so familiar with your eyes closed, trying to navigate your own home. Well, today's episode is truly inspiring. Today, I speak with Brian Dickinson. Brian actually summited to the top of Mount Everest, and once there, the unthinkable happened. He became snowblind. Now, you're at the top of the world, the highest peak in the world, and now the most important sense, your eyesight, it's gone. What would you do? Well, Brian calmed down and he reacted. And I can't wait for you to hear this story. So please stay tuned as I interview Brian Dickinson. Hey, Brian, good morning. How are you? Thanks for doing this.
Hey, good morning, Charles. Thanks for having me.
No, I'm excited, Brian. I heard about you a while back and your story, and I think it's very inspiring. I don't want to give away too much. We'll talk a lot about it during the episode. So maybe if you could take a minute to introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. Name's Brian Dickinson, and I'm a father of two and a husband of one. I live up in the Pacific Northwest. I spent 6 years in the Navy as a aviation rescue swimmer. So the guys that jumped out of helicopters, rescue down pilots, a couple tours in the Gulf. And, that was down in San Diego back in my 20s when life was so simple. And then now I'm up in the Pacific Northwest. We moved up here, me and my wife, to go to grad school, and just started mountaineering. So got out and decided to climb the highest peaks of the 7 continents, and now just living the chill life up in the mountains.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Brian, would you mind, could it just a little bit, would you talk about a little bit of your career in the military? Was that something you always wanted to do? Join the Navy, be in the military?
Yeah, I think we're all wired differently, and some people join the military for right or wrong reasons. I grew up from a lot of military influence, like my dad, my grandpa. Like, it seems like everyone was in the military at some, small stint in their life. And I don't know if I always wanted to. I had opportunities, scholarship opportunities to play soccer and art. But I just wasn't necessarily ready to go straight to college. I wanted some adventure, wanted to see the world, and wanted to do, something unique. So that's why I did the, aviation rescue swimmer as part of the special ops community. So wanted to do something interesting. Actually wanted to then continue on to be a SEAL, did the N test and everything. But it was right after the first Gulf War, and they kind of put the kibosh on people changing rates midstream. So like my whole rescue swimmer group went and passed the N test, and then they had us pause. So I did my 6 years, and after that I was ready to get out.
So as far as mountaineering, was that growing up, was that something that you did? Well, I mean, you see, we see, I think I'm probably a tiny bit older than you, but I think we're both probably children of the 80s, I'll say. Different time. We always had to be outside, right? Did you find yourself back then really like looking for adventure, trying to occupy yourself?
How old are you?
I'm 50.
Okay, I'm 48. So yeah, we're right around there. Yeah, so I grew up in Southern Oregon, small town. I mean, there's less than a couple thousand people in my town. So, no, there wasn't really technology. And if there was, I couldn't afford it. So my life was about, get outside, didn't matter on the weather. We lived up on a mountain. So I was creating obstacle courses through the forest, and just, a lot of time by myself, just me and my dog, and we'd go and run through the mountains and stuff. So I think it was ingrained for sure, in a lot of camping and everything growing up. But nothing as serious as, doing the stuff that I've done more recent. But I think that seed was definitely planted. But I also think that, we're all created differently. I think just God put something in my heart that is, unique to me. We're all unique. But I think high altitude mountaineering definitely unlocked a lot of that potential that I may have had stored up.
And I had to laugh when you mentioned the obstacle course. So I grew up in the city from Philadelphia. Obviously, I didn't have I'll say nature as far as obstacle courses. So we used to create our own obstacle courses in junkyards, which probably wasn't the safest thing. And sometimes I look back and go, I probably shouldn't even be sitting here talking to you right now. It's kind of Hi, everyone. Here at the Bear Essentials podcast, we talk a lot about never hibernating on your goals. Well, that takes a certain mindset. It takes a primal mindset. So please be sure to check out our sponsor, Go Primal. And while shopping their website, goprimalusa.com, be sure to use code BEAR10 and get 10% off your purchase. Trust your instincts. Go Primal. So, as far as mountaineering, and obviously I don't do it. I've never even experienced it. But how do you train for something like that? Is there any training you can do for that, Brian?
Yeah, for sure. So it's definitely a lifestyle, like a lot of things in life. Once you commit to it, you'll have lots of folks out there that'll call you crazy. But I feel like we all are called crazy for something that we do that's unique in our life. I'm sure you can obstacle courses in the concrete jungle. That's pretty nuts. But as far as training, yeah. So I always say you train for things that are within your control, and that helps you be more elevated, more, literally more prepared to respond to things that are outside of your control. High altitude, you really can't train for, the thinness of the air, in the death zone and stuff. So you can train for being physically fit, for being mentally, emotionally, spiritually fit. So I live in Snoqualmie, Washington. It's 25 miles east of Seattle, and there's 4,000, 5,000 foot peaks surrounding me. So I can throw a 70-pound pack on and, 5 a.m. head up, do an 8 mile round trip and be back. And it just really, creates a strong core, and just there's so much, it's a slow moving pace. So, I mean, there's a lot of call it downtime, even though you're working hard, but your mind is sometimes the hardest thing to get over. And because there's always a reason to turn around. It's always easier to go, downhill with gravity on your side. But it's, when you can kind of get in that mindset and just keep figuring out a reason to take one more step forward, eventually you make the top. And then again, like I said, it's all gravity. Then you head down. And that's actually when there's more accidents, because then you let your guard down and things are easier and you take a trip and get hurt. But that's life.
So I know in reading about you, I know the big thing we'll talk about obviously is Everest, but I know you've actually summited all 7 peaks. Is that correct?
So I've climbed the 7 highest peaks, the highest peaks on the 7 continents. I've been on Denali, which is up in Alaska, 3 times, snowboarded it once, but I've never officially stood on top. I've been within 1,000 feet. I've watched it. Guy got blown off the top, going when the weather was gone. They still haven't found him. So we were searching for him, but it's one of those things. So I've climbed them all, summited 6. Denali's still out there. And, I think that's part of my story. It's sometimes, you can keep trying to hammer at a goal and start doing it for the wrong reasons. And sometimes it's okay to not accomplish it, because it truly is about that journey and how many lessons I've learned and lives I've been able to save just on that mountain, particularly when we made the choice to turn back around. So, never say never. The mountain's still there. If I choose to do it at some point, I will, but kind of had to pivot to my family and not just be away doing all my own, selfish goals.
Gotcha. Okay, so that leads us to obviously you've written a book called Blind Descent, and that's what we're going to talk about is your experience on Everest. So again, I don't want to give it away. Can you start to walk us through that experience on Mount Everest?
Sure. So Mount Everest was the third or fourth of the seven summits I was after. So I did Denali, Kilimanjaro, Mount Elbrus in Russia, and then so the fourth, so Everest. So is April and May of 2011. So Everest, highest mountain in the world, stands at 29,035 feet. So same altitude major jet airliners are cruising at. So it's a long expedition. It's a commitment. So about 2 months, and that first month is acclimating. And just to get to base camp, which stands at 17,500 feet, it's 38 miles on foot. So it takes about a week and a half just getting up to that altitude, getting to base camp where you actually start the mountain. And it's a lot. You bring a lot of gear. The Sherpa are the local people there that help out as far as like porters. And then, I had a good friend, Pasong Sherpa, who is climbing with me, who had 3 summits already to himself. So we were partnered up, and, it's a long process. And even during that, I climbed another like 20,000 foot peak, a 19,000 foot peak in the Himalayas, just acclimating. Because the problem with high altitude, you can get away and survive on some of the lower ones like Rainier and, just things that are under, 16, 17,000. But up there, there's only a third of the air up in the death zone. So if you were to pluck your body where you are right there and put yourself on the summit, you would pass out and die. So you have to spend a lot of time climbing high, coming back down, sleeping low, which creates more red blood cells, which carry oxygen so that you can survive higher. So it's actually pretty amazing to just see that process in your own body and just how horrible and sick and all these, it's pretty disgusting. Climb just the way you feel. And there's nothing glamorous about climbing by any means. But over time, you feel stronger, and then you can just be in a position after about a month to actually go for the summit. So I can kind of talk through climbing Everest. So out of base camp I went on the south side in Nepal. You can also, out of Tibet, there's the north side. So right out of base camp is the Khumbu Icefall. So it is a river of flowing ice, meaning like building size blocks of ice called seracs, and they're constantly falling. This is where you see a lot of the cheap aluminum ladders that are tied together. And I think there was like close to 30 different sections where I was climbing across those ladders over crevasses. And, I have all my gear on, my crampons, which are the spikes on my boots, and just a down suit and pack, and just going up and down. And I went through that, I think 8 times up and down, just acclimating. So it's arguably the most dangerous area on the mountain, just because the seracs fall, as soon as it heats up, it's changing every day. So every time I went through, it was a different route. So the Nepalese and the guides and everything, they employ like 5 Sherpa that are the icefall doctors. So every day they're going through, if the weather's good, going through and rerouting. And, it is what it is. So it's always an adventure. So once you get above the Khumbu Icefall, you get to Camp 1, which is kind of nested right up on top of it in a safer area. And then there's this big valley they call the Western Khum. And it's the safest area probably on the climb, even though it's going from like 19 to 21,000 feet. There's a couple sections where there's like 5 ladders tied together, which is, pretty sketchy, and just bottomless crevasses. People fall into those, and they're not found for like 20 some years. In fact, when I was there, a couple guys that fell in like, a couple decades earlier had churned up, and they were like miles down, and they found their bodies. So it's interesting how it works, but that's just glaciers for you. And then out of Camp 2 is when you start like the big climb. So you actually go up Lhotse Face. Lhotse is the 4th highest mountain in the world. and it's just a straight up wall that you're going up. So you have fixed lines. So it's ropes that are attached to like pickets and ice screws, and Sherpa guides and myself in certain circumstances will attach those lines. And you want to clean them up at the end of the season, just because the rope would be pretty, it'll just snap easy. It gets pretty exposed out there. But you climb up a couple miles, and maybe a mile up is Camp 3, which is where you cut out the shelves and you anchor the tents, and you always want to be protected, because if you fall, you go out to use a restroom or something, you slip and fall, it's game over, and it's definitely happened. And then from there, you continue up and eventually get up to a saddle between Lhotse and Everest. And that's the highest camp in the world, called the South Col. And from there, you start going for the summit if you get a good weather window.
Hang tight, everyone. We'll be right back after a word from NGBN TV.
Hey, Charles, I just wanted to welcome you and all the Bear Essential listeners and watchers to NGBN.TV. My name is Chris Rubio, and I'm the host of The Rubio Method. We are a show about men's mental health that comes out every other Wednesday with myself and my co-host Nick Monahan. We navigate the zone of men turning into middle age and going through health crises, whether it's mental, physical, and we have a good time while doing it. We tell a lot of funny stories. We have great interviews and guests, and it's just an all-around good time for about a half an hour to 45 minutes. So make sure you check out The Rubio Method as well on NGBN.TV, YouTube, Spotify, Google, and Amazon podcasts. And once again, from The Rubio Method to the Bear Essentials, welcome to NGBN.TV.
It sounds like there's a lot of different points during this, right? Is there any time during this, Brian, that you second guess yourself? Is there any time you doubt it, you want to turn back? Does that ever happen?
Yeah. I think if anyone ever says they don't, like, that's not someone I want to rope up with. Like, it's natural. It's human nature. Like, you can have the drive to go, but when I went, I had, 2 young kids and, a wife, and just, thinking about them and just the misery that I'm in. It's like, why am I here? Like, this is stupid, but it's also who I am. And, you have one shot at life, and to be able to accomplish something like that, it changes you one way or the other. In most cases for the better. It just gives you perspective in life. So, I want to be the type of husband, type of dad that's, showing my kids that you can do more in this world, and it takes effort, and you got to push forward. And, sometimes you have a small gap. Like, you never know how long you're going to have that potential. You never know how long you're going to live. And, people that are further from climbing would say, well, then you're putting yourself at risk, and you're going to shorten that, gap of life even more. Well, potentially, but like anything, everything seems crazy until you're actually doing it. And then things become more attainable, and you break it into small chunks, and, things are, as long as you're making good decisions, if things aren't good. I've turned around on Denali 3 times. It was a bad day to try to survive, and other people did die, not on my team, but that were on the mountain. So sometimes you make those good decisions and live to climb another day.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I know further along in the story, I think there really comes a point where that becomes very prevalent, the decision, and you have a decision to make. So I'll let you continue as you start to approach getting closer to being able to summit.
Yep. Yeah. So it took a month up and down, acclimating. So once you're down at base camp, back at base camp, waiting for a weather window, we're triangulating weather from, it was like Seattle and Sweden, so it's amazing all the technology we have now, because there's only a few days where you can summit on Everest. It's up there in the jet stream, monsoon season happens, and you got to get up and down quick. So once I had like this weather window, it's going to take about 5 days to get back up to the South Col, the high camp, to then be in a position to attempt a summit. And so at this point, we'll just say we're leaving at Camp 3. It's May 14th, 2011. And there was 70-mile-an-hour winds, but the next day was supposed to be calm. So I'm on the fixed lines. It's just myself and Pasong. We're heading up just slowly. Just it's pretty brutal. And what a couple people summited that night in like some horrific conditions. One like a famous Japanese climber actually died on the South Summit. But most people turned back. So they were heading down, and we were heading up to get in a position to then make an attempt the next day, to summit on May 15th. And heading up Lhotse, I got about, a couple thousand feet above camp, and I'm on this wall, and I stopped to get some water. And I have a system. I have supplemental oxygen. So I have my mask and my oxygen mask and my goggles. Took my goggles off. I was taking my mask off, and my foot slipped out and my goggles fell. So I just watched them go. And then next thing, 1,000 feet below me, some Sherpa that were going up to a higher Camp 3 were waving at me, saying they had my goggles. I was hoping they would like carry them up to me, but they were like, no, you can come down, because they were not coming up to where I was at. So that's fine. So I came off oxygen, I rappelled down. And once I got to my goggles, they had tied them into the rope. They were cracked inside. So I don't know if it was the fall or how they stopped it. I don't know. But goggles have 2 layers, inside, outside layer. And anyone who skis or is out in the cold, that the warm contrast of your breath to the cold outside creates fog and freezes goggles. Mine were freezing between layers. So I put them on, climbed back up to my gear, and couldn't really see. Eventually ripped out the internal lens, which, not realizing that, cut their effectiveness in half, but continued up. And typically on these mountains, you only have so much space to bring gear. So you don't typically bring 2 goggles. I do now, but I had to go through this, but it's not even for that reason. It's when I was down in Antarctica or back on Denali again, it's because when one freezes, you just keep swapping them out. So keep one in warm in my pocket. So for that reason, but it's not as common on Everest because you only have so much room for your gear. So anyways, I continued up and got to high camp, found Pasong. He was in a tent, and we just kind of relaxed, made a radio call to make sure the weather was still good. And there was going to be 50-mile-an-hour gusts the next day, but later in the day. So on highly glaciated peaks, you climb through the night. So just headlamp, one slow step at a time, because everything is rock solid, bulletproof ice. When it's cold out, once the sun comes up, things become pretty unstable. So the goal was get up, sunrise, and then head back down. So once the sun set, we set as well. We started up the mountain, and just moving up, it's very, very slowly. Takes 5 seconds or more between each step, just having a third of the air, and just, even though we were acclimated, even though we're on supplemental oxygen, it's slow moving, all that gear, and just slowly. And I was inching away from Pasong, and we had a rendezvous point at the balcony, which is at 27,500 feet. So I eventually got there and waited for about an hour, and which is very uncharacteristic of him because he's younger than I am, and just he was going really slow. So he got there, and he's like, I'm not feeling good, and I run out of water. So I gave him some of my water. He took a sip and then threw up. So I'm like, oh, keep it. And I'm like, dude, are you okay? Like thinking, okay, we just need to head down. And he's, he said, no, I'm okay. I just needed some water and some food. So we continued up, and about 28,000 feet, right before this kind of rock wall area, he's tapped out. He's like, no, I'm done. I'm going to go back to the balcony and wait for you. He's like, you're feeling good. You should continue. I'll be fine down here. And, it's these conversations you have in the death zone that, you can live and die by. and all you have is the information that you have right in front of you. So it was definitely one of those, real conversations, weighing every factor out. How was I doing? I felt strong. How was the weather? The weather was good. But most importantly, how was Pasong? And he assured me he was good. He says, I'll leave an extra oxygen here for when you come down. And then he turned down, went back, and I continued up. And the important part about this, two things. One, there's fixed lines. So if there weren't ropes attached to the mountain, that would have been an easy, because I've never been to the summit before. But there was a route, and there's safety in being attached to those lines. So I continued up, and there was a second part to that as well. I don't know. I'll probably come back to it.
No, that's fine. And can I just ask you one thing too? You mentioned it a couple times, and just to give the audience more who aren't familiar, you say death zone. Could you just kind of describe that a little bit? Because it sounds ominous.
Yeah, it is. So the death zone is something that climbers coined, the phrase back, I don't know, 20, 30 or longer years ago, but it's anything above 26,000 feet. So at that altitude, there's a third of the air, third of the ozone. So you cannot acclimate above that. If you cut your finger, it won't heal. So you're dying above 26,000 feet. So you want to limit your exposure for sure. So anyways, I continued up, and at that point it's a, I don't know, down at low altitude, it'd be a rock climb that you could just scramble up. But when you're trying to point, one single point of your crampon and lunge yourself up on the rope, it's a lot. So every time it was a lot of effort. Oh, the other thing I was meant to come back to is Pasong and I were the only two attempting the summit that day from the south or the north, which is very unusual in this day and time. Like you've seen crowds and stuff. It's because there's one way up, one way down in a very small window. So it was very unusual. So very, very peaceful. I could move at my own pace, and I tend to move, pretty efficiently. So continued up that rock climb, got to the south summit, which is it's a moment of humility because you see it coming and it looks like a summit, but it's a false summit. And then you have to drop back down and then go up Hillary Step, which is a 40-foot rock climb, which again is another point of contention, but because I was alone, I was able to bounce over that. And then this last section is the Cornice Traverse. So close to the summit, it's a small, like 2-foot wide path, and it is a 2-mile drop on your right into Tibet and a 2-mile drop to your left into Nepal. So you want to stay focused, stay low. So got across that slowly, and then I could see the summit in the distance, and just slowly made my way there, and eventually pierced my crampons onto the roof of the world. And it's one of 2 people in the Himalayan database that have ever had the summit to myself on a given day. Obviously that's not what I was going for. It's just sometimes life works out, and there I was, and just emotional. It's something that I still process to this day. It's just it's an amazing experience to just be there. And if you've ever been in those situations where it's like, I need to really process this right now, and you can't. You just don't have the capability in your brain to just absorb it all in. So you try to take it in as much as you can.
That's amazing. That again, we go back to the decisions, right? That you had a choice that day. You could have kept going or went back down. You go up. So I imagine as you get to the top, now it's definitely worth it, right? I'm glad you're glad at that point that you made it. You're there. And then how long do you have while you're on top of Everest as far as being able to absorb it and take it in?
Yeah, you can't stay up there long. Typically maybe an hour. But I knew the weather was going to be changing. and I needed to get down. And, I was definitely exhausted. It's not like I slept the day prior or anything. So I made a radio call, and I let one of the guys I was climbing with was a day behind. He and his climbing Sherpa Lakpa, and just let him know that, I made it to the summit, and, I was going to head down. And I remember he came on and he mentioned, he's like, okay, well, just you and Pasong be safe on your way down. And that's when I realized no one knows I'm alone.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, well, that's cool. But Pasong went down like over an hour ago. And he's like, you're alone? He's like, all right, well, be safe. And he mentioned, I talked to him afterward. He asked Lakpa, who has 5 summits at that point. He's like, how long is it going to take Brian to get down to the high camp? He's like, because he had been climbing with me for the last month. And he's like, oh, Brian, it'll take him maybe like 3 hours. And no one would hear from me for 7.
Well,
so go ahead.
Unfortunately, though, right, Brian? I mean, I guess the situation where you're at, I mean, there's really not much they can do for you anyway, right? It's just almost like a waiting game at that point.
It is. Yeah. It's all survival up there. Like, that's why there's so many bodies up on the mountain. And I would never want someone to risk their life to come get me when I made a decision to, 1, climb the highest peak in the world, and then 2, continue up by myself. Like, that's, I would, that'd be horrible. So I didn't have much time. I took some pictures, and, the highest selfie in the world, and then started down. And it was about, I don't know, like maybe 10 yards into it, everything just went completely white. And I realized I went snowblind. And I remember just at that moment, just reaching down and grabbing the line I was attached to and just assessing the situation. It's something we were taught to do in the military, to not panic. Panic kills. And just to realize what had happened. So the sun banking off the ice fried my cornea. And when it happens, it's immediate. And it takes about 24 hours to return your eyesight. And I wouldn't regain mine fully for about a month and a half.
Wow. And Brian, does that directly have to do with the fact that your goggles were broken, that the half or whatnot?
Yeah. And so it's a lot of factors, but I think that was one of the main contributors. But just being up there, just the thin air, having blue eyes, and just as soon as there's a lot of times when you're off goggles too. So all of that adds up. And then, having the goggles, half their effectiveness definitely didn't help, but none of that mattered. I had to get down. And I just remember grabbing that rope and thinking, I'm at the highest point in the world. Nobody's coming to get me. I'm blind, and I have to get up and start moving, or I'm not going to make it. And without overthinking it, I did. I stood up, hand over hand, using my other senses, trying so hard to use my eyes. They just did not work. So with snow blindness, it's not black. It's bright white. It's like if you put a light bulb an inch from your face, you can't see anything. You can put your finger in between the bulb and your eyes. You'll know something just moved, but that's as good as it gets. You cannot focus, and it hurts. It feels like potato chips in your eyelids. Like, you realize how often your eyes are twitching and moving. But I don't remember focusing on the pain as much, just so focused on trying to get down, and just hand over hand, coming out of anchor points, going across that Cornice Traverse. I could hear the 50-mile-an-hour gusts of wind coming over, and I would just hunker down, let it blow over me. And I'd get up, take one more step. And then on Hillary Step, the 40-foot rock climb, reversing my gear and rappelling down, and remember just slipping out and just penduluming down and hitting the rocks, and just kind of like sliding down and sitting there assessing, am I broken? No. Okay. You got to keep moving. And then had to climb up the south summit. Remember where I dropped down, had to climb back up that. And that was a lot climbing up. Like, I'm pretty exhausted. And then on the other side, just slipped out and because things were getting a little, the sun was coming out, it was getting a little more slushy. And I remember just tumbling head over heels. The scariest thing I've ever, had happen. It's like go up on your roof, close your eyes, and jump off. You just never know when you're going to hit. And fortunately, the rope I was attached to shock loaded, stopped my fall. I would have fallen for over a mile. My oxygen bottles coming out of my pack, it's ripped from my face. And I just remember just breathing so hard. I had to just right myself, calm my breathing, readjust all my gear, and then, get moving again. And, all these things were taking a lot of time, but I kept moving. A little slab avalanche cut out on that rock area, because I was trying to come down this snow path to the north of it. And I remember grabbing the rope because I just accelerated and it cut a line through my leather gloves, but I stopped myself. And again, my heart is just pumping out of my chest, and had to calm myself down and just keep moving. And this whole time I felt this presence around me, and I never thought too much about it, just that I had this, it's like if we're in a room together, you close your eyes, I'm still there. It's just this peaceful presence. And I never felt alone. And I kept moving, got down to where Pasong had turned around and almost walked right past the extra oxygen bottle he had left. And I remember kind of dropping down in the snow, because I saw this bright orange thing, and I knew I'd be out soon. So I fumbled with my regulator, put it on the bottle, and it didn't work. So I don't know what was going on. And I don't know why to this day, but I put that extra 15 pounds, that extra bottle in my pack, and then reattached to my other one and continued moving. Got to the balcony where Pasong said he was going to be, but he wasn't there. I was calling for him. He wasn't around. So I figured he must have went down, which is the right move. If he was not feeling well, he needed to get down. But I remember being happy at that point. And I got down from the summit. I have about 20 pitches of rappel, a mix of rock and ice. And I'm like, I can do this, and at this point it had been over 30 hours of being awake, climbing in the harshest conditions, now blind. But I reversed my gear and I started rappelling down, and I don't know, maybe 20 feet into it, my mask just starts sucking into my face and I ran out of oxygen. I was suffocating. I remember just ripping it off my face and dropping down to my knees. And just at that moment, I couldn't go on by myself anymore. And I remember just praying. I'm like, just simple, God, I can't do this. Please help me. And I'd never experienced anything like this, but immediately I felt like I was lifted to my feet and had life, had energy. And I remember, without overthinking it, I fumbled for that extra oxygen bottle and just with touch, put my regulator on it, and I got a positive flow. And I remember taking 5 deep breaths, and it was like fire re-entering my veins. I felt the pain of life re-entering. And I got all my gear back, and I started rappelling down, just what seemed fast, it was like slow motion, but it's just letting the gravity work. And eventually made it to the last quarter mile, and I'm stumbling through camp, or not camp, but quarter mile to camp. And it's rock and ice and can't see anything. And out of nowhere, Pasong just hugs me. He saw me coming, and he's like, "Brian, you alive?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh," it scared the heck out of me. And I'm like, he's like, "I'm so sorry I'd leave you." And I'm like, "Don't worry about it, dude." I'm like, "Let's get back to camp." And got back there, and I just laid down, got my gear off, and threw on my camera. He was checking out my summit pics. And then I was passed out for every 14, 15 hours. My eyes were glued shut. I'd lost 20 pounds, had black eyes, and but I was alive. I mean, I was still in the death zone, still had to get down. And the next day, we went down together, and he gave me an extra pair of goggles, and just made it down slowly, and, almost stepped into a crevasse and, helped me along. And it wasn't until later that day I borrowed a satellite phone, and had them dial my wife and gave her a quick call. And she had heard through the Sherpa community that I had summited. So she was pretty pumped about that. She had no idea what I had been through. And so I definitely own the worst phone call in the world, because I'm like, Joanna, just stop. She was talking, and with sat phones, you're always like delayed. It's going back and forth. And I just said, I soloed the summit and I'm blind. And then the phone cut out. So I wouldn't be able to talk to her for another day until I got to base camp. So my bad. But so just fortunate and blessed to be alive.
So at what point after all this happens and you're back with your wife, when she kind of smack you upside your head and say, "Why'd you scare me so bad?"
Yeah, she's awesome. So I mean, it's interesting because there's so many ways you can take the story, but she's a counselor, and she recognizes that we are wired differently. We were together when I was in the Navy, jumping out of helicopters and doing a tour in the Gulf, and we've always respected, we've had boundaries and respected who we are, because that's who makes us who we are. And sometimes you get into situations, and the fact that I was able to survive, you never want to be in that situation. I don't know if I went back there, if I could survive it again, but I know that I didn't do it on my own. And so she hasn't smacked me yet, not physically, maybe emotionally.
So it definitely sounds like, when you tell the story, I mean, obviously the first thing that comes to my mind is, obviously your military training probably plays a role, but I think, and even watching you today, you still seem to get somewhat emotional when you talk about that moment where you almost are, you're saying, "I can't do it alone. I need help." And that seemed really powerful, even watching you tell that today. And from what I've read and heard, I mean, I know that you are a man of faith. And so you feel like your faith really helped pull you through that situation?
I think I tried so hard to do it on my own. I honestly, yes, my faith is strong, but it was definitely solidified in that moment. I've never had such a tangible experience. And I feel the entire time, Jesus is walking with me with his hand outstretched, waiting for me to ask for help, and probably laughing along the way, like, "Okay, stupid, keep trying on your own. Eventually you'll come to me." And I reached that point. And yeah, I don't think I'd be alive otherwise. I can't explain it any other way. I asked and I received.
And Brian, do you look back now and do you start to think, understanding your faith and even hearing that part you just told now, do you feel like it's all for a reason? Because now, since it's happened, right, with your speaking, things like that, even this podcast, somebody's going to hear this, and I think they're going to be down, and they're going to be going through something, and they're going to hear this, and it's going to pull them through. I mean, do you feel like it was all for a reason, and there was something even bigger than Everest for you to accomplish?
Yeah. Yes. And thank you for putting it that way. Because even when I said not making the summit of Denali, like, there's always some hidden message there. How is God working in me to help others? And it's a humbling experience. And there are, a few hundred bodies on Everest. So I get to live with survivor's guilt. And I think it does bring peace to be able to give talks. And when people read Blind Descent, and it has helped them. And I partner with, YouVersion, the Bible app. So I have a few devotionals written on there. And I'm also getting my second book published about my military experience, because a lot of this, it's, I've dealt with trauma my whole life, growing up to military to now mountaineering. My job in the military was dealing with trauma in very traumatic situations and learning to be calm, in chaos. So giving talks, a lot of people will ask about that. How didn't you panic up there? And a lot of it's because we were conditioned to not panic. We were jumping out of a helicopter in the middle of the ocean to save someone who was panicking, who was dying and drowning. My whole book now, it's called So Others May Live, is to abstract some of the training and experiences that not only I went through, but rescue swimmers throughout history have dealt with, from the Apollo crew splashing down in the ocean to Vietnam to Gulf Wars and Katrina and different, just lots of just unique situations, a lot cooler stories than mine. But if that can help others, I think that is, I think my purpose, was probably highlighted beyond what I thought imaginable, and it is very humbling because I'm just human. I'm as flawed as anyone, but I've had some unique experiences and others have been able to benefit. So again, just blessed and humbled through that.
Yeah, Brian, it's definitely an amazing story. And like I said earlier, I mean, that was the biggest reason I wanted to have you on. I mean, obviously your story in itself, your book, all that was of interest to me, but I wanted to have you on here to hope even, if one person hears this and it impacts them in a positive way, then I feel like it was worth you and I connecting. One last question I did want to ask you, since this has happened, will you ever go back to Everest?
Never say never. So I would love to bring my family to base camp. There's a couple Himalayan peaks that I wouldn't mind doing. The best part of climbing to me is the way down, because if you're climbing through the night, you make the summit, to see it on the way down is just, it's amazing. I didn't get to see it on the way down. so it's a bummer, but no, I don't have any plans to go back. If my kids at some point wanted to climb it, I might go with them or something. But at this point, there's so many adventures, there's no shortage of adventures in this world. And I feel fulfilled. And I don't know, at some form of me is I've survived it once. That should be enough.
Well, Brian, I'm really, I feel fortunate for having a chance to speak with you today, because I meant what I said. I think at this point, your purpose is beyond Everest. It's bigger. And I think you're doing the work you're supposed to do. And I can only imagine how many people you're impacting. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And I'm looking forward to watching you continue to do that. Looking forward to your new book coming out. Any website, anything like that, if people want to check you out, they should go to?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you can just Google Brian Dickinson. I usually pop as one of the top guys for this experience. But yeah, it's briandickinson.net, and I'm on every flavor of social media.
Nice. And I want to add to that, I also I am friends with you on Facebook, actually, and I must say, if you're just interested in seeing some of the most beautiful pictures, scenic pictures, just look at Brian's Facebook, because he puts your pictures are amazing. Every day I look at those. When you post a picture, I'm always amazed how breathtaking it is. So you're definitely worth following for multiple reasons. Well, Brian, can't thank you enough. Thanks again. And I wish you nothing but the best. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Take care.
This has been the Bear Essentials. Thanks for listening. And remember, never hibernate on your goals.